Great to be back here with Rabbi Naomi Levy, back at Valley Beit Midrash. Thanks for joining us.
It's my honor and my joy.
Who is the founder and spiritual leader of Nashuvah, groundbreaking Jewish spiritual outreach community in LA. If you live in LA and haven't checked it out, I hope you will, or if you're visiting. And is the author, award-winning author of many books. And here we're going to talk about Einstein and the Rabbi searching for the soul. Can you tell us why you wrote this book?
I think that I was led to write it. And I ask people that all the time. Have you ever felt like you were led somewhere that you hadn't planned to go? Because that's really what happened to me. I was really doing research and wanting to teach a class about oneness and about how we're all interconnected. And I came upon this quote by Einstein.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm just paraphrasing, that a human being is part of the whole, called by us universe. He sees himself as something separate from the rest, but it's merely an optical delusion. And he says that the role of what Einstein calls true religion is to free ourselves from that delusion. And I found that so powerful. That we're all suffering from some sort of optical delusion, which is why we can label people as other.
Right.
It's why we see people as other. And I became obsessed with this quote. I found myself meditating on it, and then for some reason that I can't even explain, because it had nothing to do with oneness or the class that I was teaching or the research I was doing, I was asking myself, where did this quote come from? Where did Einstein say these words? Because they meant so much to me. And I started uncovering layer upon layer that Einstein had written it as a letter, that he'd written it actually as a condolence letter to a grieving father. And I started to ask myself, who is this grieving father? And it said, somebody named Dr. Robert Marcus. And I find myself asking, well, who? Who was he? What kind of doctor was he? And what did he say to Einstein that led Einstein to write him these words that spoke to me so personally? And it turns out Dr. Robert Marcus was no doctor. He was a rabbi. And Rabbi Robert Marcus was the grieving father who had written to Einstein looking for help. And it turns out that Rabbi Robert Marcus was an Orthodox rabbi, graduate of Yeshiva University, who during World War II was a chaplain. And he was there on the beaches of Normandy. He was there. And when Buchenwald was liberated, Rabbi Marcus discovered something unbelievable. He discovered close to 1,000 Jewish boys alive. And as you know, children were the first to slaughter in the concentration camps. And he finds 1,000 children alive, and they become his obsession. And he wants to make sure that they're all taken care of, and they're all orphans. One of them was a 16-year-old boy who looked more dead than alive, whose name was Eliezer. But we don't know him as Eliezer. The world came to know him as Elie Wiesel. And Rabbi Marcus does everything for these kids, everything that he can, and he personally escorts them to orphanages in France. And he does many other things, which I guess I'm not going to get into all of them right this moment. But Rabbi Marcus then returns back home to be reunited with his own family, his wife, his eldest son, who was just a little pitskala himself, maybe 9 years old, another one named Stephen, and a little girl who had been born while he was overseas. So he'd never met her yet. And Rabbi Marcus deserves to be on vacation, but instead he assumes the position as political director of the World Jewish Congress, and where he fights for the rights of Jews throughout the world. And he also has a status at the United Nations, and what keeps him awake at night and what he works on, I know, is very dear to you and is very prophetic because what kept Rabbi Marcus awake at night is what keeps us awake at night. The two issues that most troubled him were the rights of stateless peoples and the rights of refugees. And prophetically, Rabbi Marcus understood that these weren't only Jewish issues. They were issues that would plague humanity. Rabbi Marcus was traveling to fight for better rights of Europe's Jews, and his wife took the kids to a bungalow colony in the Catskills, and polio struck. And all three of his children contracted polio, but his eldest son, Jay, died almost instantly from polio. Rabbi Marcus races back home, but it's too late. And in his grief and in his pain, he reaches out, not to Rav Soloveitchik, not that I know of, I've been through all his papers, but from what I can tell, who he reaches out to is a physicist. And these are the words that Einstein writes him. And part of the book is a search for what exactly did Rabbi Marcus ask to elicit these words of comfort.
Right.
A human being is part of a whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He sees himself as separate from the rest, but it's merely an optical delusion.
You know, it's interesting. I think that both different types of religious people and secular people can relate to this idea of oneness. Whether it's monism, that there is only oneness in reality, or a form of pantheism, that God is everything in its entirety, or panentheism, that God is everything but also beyond, or even a secular kind of materialism in a sense. Einstein building off the work of Spinoza.
Yes.
You know, basically the sense of nature as kind of the beginning and end. You know, I think that idea is so powerful that it can permeate through a whole bunch of theologies and philosophies. And actually, surprisingly enough, unite us.
Yes. What I try to put forth in the book is that the piece of us, I believe, the piece of us that can see as expansively as what Einstein is describing is the soul. That's the piece of us. Our eyes can't see that way. Our ears can't hear that way. But there's a piece of us that has that kind of vision. And sort of the tragedy of life is that we have trouble hearing what our souls are trying to say to us. We have trouble seeing what our souls can see.
So why do you think that is? What are the barriers?
I think that, you know, over and over as a rabbi, I meet people who are in some way or another disconnected from the voice within. They're disconnected from themselves. And there are so many voices that shout at us. There are voices from the outside in our culture that are always shouting at us about what success looks like, who we ought to be, what beauty looks like, you know, all these things that scream at us. And then there are voices within that shout at us. The voice of the ego and its ambitions and its vanity, the voice of the body and its desire. But the soul doesn't shout. And that's the problem. And that's the paradox. And that's how it is that you can find yourself, and I see it in young people, and I see it in people who are in their midlife suddenly saying, I chose a path to satisfy my ego, and it actually ran against the grain of my soul. And I see it in younger people who turn themselves inside out, you know, to get into this program or this life path. But it's actually because either they're trying to please somebody from the outside, or they're trying to please a voice from the inside that actually isn't the voice to follow.
So what do you think is gained? Clearly there is a vanity to just living in the mundane and being unable to tap into the sacred, however you understand that. But what do you think becomes gained when one searches for, and I don't want to say finds their soul, but is in a process of discovery, or engagement with their soul? What can be gained there?
Well, I want to take one step
Yeah.
back and say, I think that often when people have trouble finding their soul, part of it is they have a misconception that becoming connected to their soul will lead to peace of mind.
Right.
And at least from a Jewish perspective, the soul doesn't deal in peace. And actually, living with soul can keep you up at night. And I love this idea that Adin Steinsaltz actually said. He said, the person who thinks he's arrived is the one who's lost his way. So what can soul do for us? Well, it can upset us, actually.
Yeah.
It can disturb us because suddenly the things that we've been ignoring, we start seeing.
Well, since you brought up Rabbi Steinsaltz, something else relevant, I think, and I'm curious if this jives with you, is he says, why, after in the Garden of Eden, after they ate from Eitz Hadat Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they had Shabbat before they were expelled, why didn't they then go and eat from Eitz Chaim, from the eternal life? And he says, because once you have knowledge of the mind, you can miss the simple truths. And I wonder if that's part of what you're saying, that it's not just peace. Simple truths are not necessarily simple. They are a quiet voice of authenticity, of inner truth that runs deeper sometimes than all the complexity we're holding on to.
Well, sometimes knowledge isn't, well, always. Just kind of living in your head isn't enough. And, living with soul, it's the key to intimacy. It's the key to love. It's the key to finding your calling, to really understanding why you're here and what you can be doing with your life and with your gifts and with your talents. It's the key to understanding how to parent.
Right.
To understand that you're not here to create some carbon copy of yourself or to raise somebody to fulfill your dreams, but to better understand the soul of this child that you had the honor to bring into this world. And to see them. Part of it has to do with being quiet enough to listen. And what are the things that we can do in life to make space for the soul to speak and to nourish the soul?
And yet I think many people might think, and I'm curious if you agree, that means we have to become monks and gurus and go live in the world of the soul. Whereas I think part of the Jewish wisdom is that the spiritual life and the physical life are intertwined. The soul has to enter into our marriage, into our parenting, into our workplace. Yes, there has to be retreat. There has to be places of nourishment. But then it has to become integrated into life. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't... The key is not to lock yourself in a cave.
Right.
The key is to live in the world and to see what divine service means. And it's not about escape, and it's not about solitude. It's about connection, which is what I think Einstein was saying.
Yeah, right.
It's about connection with all things, but it means also connection with the dead.
So I don't want to be too critical of American Jewish life or of the establishment of synagogues, but why do you think the soul was not invited into the American Jewish establishments, including many of the synagogue models? I mean, obviously your work has been to create a different type of model, but why do you think that has been devoid?
I hesitate to say devoid. Because I think that's going too far. But let's just say that it saddens me when I meet people, and it doesn't matter whether they're young Jews, middle-aged Jews, or senior citizens, who tell me things like, I feel connected to God or to my soul in my yoga class or in the Zen center, but when I'm at shul, I can't feel it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean, that God isn't there or that there aren't soulful experiences there, but they're not necessarily easy to access. And I think that's not just a challenge, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, if we think about the fact that the majority of America's Jews are unaffiliated, I mean, we can look at that situation in many different ways, but I look at it as an opportunity also, and I think, at least for me, I had the mistaken assumption that unaffiliated Jews were atheists.
Right.
And that's why they weren't coming to shul, but that didn't mean they weren't proud Jews. They might be social justice Jews, or they might be environmental Jews, or they might be cultural Jews. And I've not conducted a study about it, but I can tell you anecdotally from my conversations with unaffiliated Jews that many of them are deeply spiritual.
Yeah.
Deeply spiritual, and they want to find a way in. And part of the goal of this book, but part of my mission as a rabbi, has been for a very long time to help people find their voice in prayer, help people get better aligned with the deepest parts of themselves, and to see that perhaps there's actually the very voice of God echoing, not just throughout the universe, but echoing within, which is something the rabbis say, that somehow, like, I hate to quote Austin Powers or something, but like that the soul is God's mini-me, As God fills the universe, the soul fills the body. As God bears the universe, the soul bears the body. As God sees and is not seen, the soul sees and is not seen.
So maybe a last question. We talk in Modeh Ani about God being chai v'kayam, chai, living and evolving, but also stable and rooted and not changing, kayam. And I wonder how you think about soul development. We talk a lot today about abortion and when does a life begin, when does a soul enter the body. We talk a lot about end of life and when does a soul leave the body. And then there's this whole developmental stage of child development, adult development. And we focus on physical development, we focus on intellectual development, emotional development to some degree, but we don't talk a lot about soul development. And I wonder if you think about this as in stage theories, or counseling someone who's a teenager versus an adult versus a senior, and what that journey kind of looks like. I know that's kind of a broad question.
No, I have several things to say.
Oh, great.
First is it's interesting that you say that, because I know you are looking forward to reading this book.
Yeah, yes, exactly, yeah.
But that's actually what I talk about,
awesome.
that there's the nefesh, ruach, neshama, they don't come all at once. Some say that they actually come through maturation, but I actually prefer the idea that it's earned, that you earn higher levels of soul by connecting with soul and by nourishing your soul, and by doing so, you allow other levels. They talk about how sort of nefesh becomes a merkava, or it becomes a throne as well for ruach, which then becomes a throne for neshama.
Right.
So that we acquire higher level of soul. What does it mean to acquire a higher level of soul? It means that with each level, it's possible to have more expansive vision, to have deeper and wider connections, to even have flashes of prophetic insight at the highest levels, not permanent flashes that can have a transformative effect on us.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting you say, when does the soul, because the rabbis say ensoulment occurs at conception. But it doesn't mean that life occurs then.
Right.
But it's so interesting because I see my book here, and I don't even know who's the rabbi. Whose study are we in?
This is Rabbi Linder's office, yeah.
Hi, Rabbi Linder.
He's on sabbatical.
But I actually wrote a prayer for the termination of pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
And I was terrified.
Oh, I have this book. Is this the prayer book?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, nice.
I was
Oh,
terrified.
look, you wrote him a note, or someone did.
Really? I'll have to look at that in a
Okay.
second. But I was terrified when I wrote it. And I actually gave the prayer to a Catholic priest before the book was published to say, what kind of trouble am I getting myself into?
Right.
But when you talk about soul, I'd like to read this prayer.
Great.
A prayer after the termination of a pregnancy. I made a decision, God, to terminate my pregnancy. This choice was not made lightly. I prayed. I meditated. I searched my soul for an answer. I knew in my heart that I should not complete this pregnancy. You know my heart, God. You know my pain. You know my anguish. In your infinite wisdom, I pray that you will glean the spark of potential life and plant it where it may grow and flourish. Help me, God. Shield me from the reproach of those who do not know my heart. Teach me how to overcome feelings of shame and guilt. Let me begin again, God. Lead me to new hope, to new joy. Hear me, heal me, never leave me. Amen.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I hope folks will pick up Einstein and the Rabbi, Searching for the Soul, and there's a lot of depth here, and also engage this journey of building, expanding the throne upon throne, the Merkava, where that can hold the higher expansiveness. In Shabbat, we talk about Neshama Yetera, gaining an extra layer of soul that comes from the quiet. You talked about the soul doesn't scream, the quiet that comes in rest and reflection. And I can think a few things more important in 21st century American Jewish life, 21st century in general, than going on this journey. So I hope this book is wildly successful. I'm sure it already is, and continue all your wonderful work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.